This was not planned.
Well,
No.
okay, now it's working. Oh, okay, there we go. Hi.
Well, first of all, welcome, Rufus, and thank you for being with us. We know you have a rather busy week.
Yes.
And I would just like to give an extra thanks because Rufus came in real style. He just got off an airplane at 5:20 p.m. tonight at Charles de Gaulle. We were so terrified he wasn't going to make it that we asked him if he would agree to come on a moto taxi, which I confess I didn't know what it was. Sherry was the one who told me about this, and he accepted. And how was it?
Well, it was a lot of things. It was pretty horrifying at the beginning, but then I got used to it, and then it became kind of thrilling, and certainly, driving through the city was very beautiful, and
it wasn't raining.
And it wasn't raining, so thankfully it wasn't raining. I didn't die.
What more can you ask? You once called opera the secret ingredient to your pop songs, and when we were sitting together in 2018 in this very room, it was right before the premiere of your opera Hadrian, commissioned by Alexander Neff, who was then head of the Canadian Opera Company and now is the Director General of the Paris Opera Company. Tonight we're going to focus on the first half of 2024, namely the opening of your first musical, and in 4 days' time, this is why he's so busy, the world premiere of your dream Requiem. Let's start with opening night, the musical. Okay. Your pop songs are considered very highbrow for pop, and at least when you first started writing opera, your first opera, Prima Donna, the opera world was reluctant to see you as anything but a pop songwriter. Theoretically, the middle ground between pop and quote-unquote serious music would seem to be musical theater, musicals. A long time ago, I asked you why you had never written a musical. And tonight, I'm asking you, why did you write a musical?
Well, let's see. I mean, I have an American father, Loudon Wainwright, and my mother is sadly no longer with us, but she was Canadian, and they divorced when I was about 3 years old, and so I moved up north with my mom, and I would visit my dad every once in a while for a weekend here and there, and he always brought me to musicals, and that was so it was this sort of injection of kind of American culture, and then right back up to Montreal. But so I and opera. So I fell in love with the genre there, in terms of why I wrote opening night in this musical is that Ivo Van Hove, who directed the piece, he and I had been wanting to do something for many years, and one day, and we were both big. The opening night is based on the Cassavetes movie, Opening Night, and it's a film that we both love, and so we decided to do it. It became quite a saga once we composed it, and once it was produced. It was whatever, an opera in itself. The musical became an opera.
Well, the next opera is going to be about the making of Opening Night. But before we actually get into the musical, a number of Arts Arena members traveled to London to see it in March. But for those who did not, I just want to give a quick summary so you'll know what we're talking about. As Rufus said, it's an adaptation of the 1977 John Cassavetes film, Opening Night, directed and adapted by the highly esteemed director Ivo Van Hove. I say Hove. Is it Hove?
Ivo Van Hove. I say Hove.
I say Hove, okay. With music and lyrics by Rufus. It's a play within a play with dueling realities several times over. and it's being filmed on stage as part of the show. It recounts the story of actress Myrtle Gordon, played by musical star Sharon Smith, in psychic disarray as she rehearses a Broadway show and prepares for, yes, its opening night. You can already see the meta qualities that are involved. It's a dark portrait, but not without humor, of Myrtle's unraveling that features a number of men and a fanatic fan who is killed by a car just after meeting the actress and then comes back to haunt her. If you didn't follow that, if it's not entirely clear, don't worry. It's not easy to follow. The Guardian gave opening night a 4-star out of 4 rating and sums it up this way, quote, "A Broadway star in the midst of a mental crisis in Ivo van Hove and Rufus Wainwright's glittering and extravagantly original musical adaptation of the Cassetti's film." Here are a few shots from the musical. Okay, we'll leave up that last image. Your first opera that I just mentioned, Prima Donna, is about a fading diva. Your second, Hadrian, is about a fading emperor.
Yeah.
One reviewer speaks of, and I love this, he speaks of your gift for doomed glory. Nor is this Ivo van Hove's first fading star.
Yeah.
He directed All About Eve, and a Dutch language non-musical take on opening night in 2006. What intrigues or fascinates both of you to such an extent about fading divas? You can answer for yourself, not for me.
Yeah. Well, I saw the film many years ago when I was about 17 in Montreal, and I was deeply affected by it. And then years later, I saw it again in Estonia, of all places. It's in this interesting kind of old communist movie theater that had turned into kind of like an art house theater. And so, and I saw it there, and then I would see it here and there. And every time it got more, I could relate to it more and more as I got older and more decrepit and faded. So it just meant a lot to me as a piece. And then, I've mentioned this before, and it's become a bit of what happened is that Ivo and I really wanted to work on something, and then I at one point got very depressed, right before COVID actually, for about a few months. And I went to Australia, which may have been part of the problem. No, I love Australia, but it's so happy down there, and so bright and sunny, and I just wasn't in that mode. I was in kind of a dark mode. And I was in Tasmania, and I just had this really tough day, and I asked sort of the spirits that be, or whoever was out there, to send me a message, to kind of help me through this day, and I suddenly had a vision of opening night, of the movie opening night, and Jenna Rowland's performance. And then that really helped me for some reason. I kind of focused on that image of her. And then about a week later, I flew back to America, and I looked at my phone, and I looked, and there was a message from Ivo van Hove saying, "What do you think of doing opening night as a musical?" Total non sequitur. So I took that as a sign, which is actually, I will say that is often how I decide to do things.
But you do like fading divas.
No, I do like fading divas, or more importantly, fading divas like me. They choose me. It's never intentional actually with me, what I want to do in those respects. It has to come from some strange calling, and that's what happened.
Well, despite her slew of awards and acclaimed roles, Sheridan Smith says that your songs are so tricky that she had to take extra singing lessons. And I quote her, "Rufus has got a range like I've never heard. He is a genius. I think it's the biggest challenge I've ever taken on." Now, one of your most successful performances was Rufus Sings Judy, where you redid all the songs of Judy Garland, another fading diva, her farewell concert at Carnegie Hall. And this is a very serious question because I thought of it while I was watching the show.
Yeah.
Did you ever consider playing the role of the troubled diva in opening night yourself and singing your own music?
Well, actually, I did a video years ago called for a song called "Out of the Game," which featured Helena Bonham Carter dressed up as a librarian, as a bored librarian, and then I appear as many different characters. I think I appear as Kurt Cobain, and also as like Harrison Ford or something like from Indiana Jones, and also I dressed up as Jenna Rollins from opening night. So I did actually dress up as Jenna Rollins in this video, and then at the end of the video, with some camera work, the four of us have an orgy. so it gets even weirder.
Well, you said from the first that opening night is nothing like it has ever been seen on the West End.
Yeah.
And the critics tended to agree with that. The Guardian says it shakes up musical theater. The Sunday Times headlines, "Sheridan Smith shines in a bizarre drama." Time Out gives it 4 stars and calls it, quote, "Evil Van Hove and Rufus Wainwright's deliciously odd, not really a musical." So my question is, what do you consider our opening night's radical departures from a normal, really a musical?
Well, I mean, look, Evo especially didn't necessarily want to rely on traditional, tricks of the musical theater world. And I also, as you said, I'm a big opera fan. I also, and so forth. So I'm not like entrenched in that whole system of the musicals and so forth. But so I think we were sort of dead set on creating something interesting, and that is what we thought of as a musical. But I will say, for anybody who knows, I mean, it was sort of it was an artistic triumph and a financial flop. Yeah, and so it was a very difficult. So we had to close early, sadly, which was very devastating, actually. But that being said, I think that what I did learn is that the audience for musicals in general is pretty conservative, especially in England. I mean, they expect a song and dance. They expect glittery costumes. They expect legs kicking everywhere. So we didn't give them that, and they were kind of pissed.
Well, let's talk about your music for it. If I counted correctly, you wrote 25 songs?
About that.
Yeah, about that. How do you characterize the music? It's not exactly Oklahoma or Brigadoon or Carousel.
Yeah, well, for one thing, I wanted it to sound somewhat as if not if it was from 1977, like I wasn't imitating that era, but I did want something that was, I don't know, had a similar kind of melodic center. I mean, I grew up. I was born in 1973, and my parents were both big, fairly well-known musicians in the golden era of songwriting of that period in America. And they knew people like Bonnie Raitt and Linda Ronstadt and everything. And so there's something about that era where the songs were really, I don't know, they were central to life, and there were songs that people would sing. So I tried to imitate a bit of that craft, I guess, that did exist back then, before it was more about, whoever the producer was, or, how many likes you got, or stuff like that. So I tried to I was kind of a bit old-fashioned in that sense.
Well, now we're going to get a bit to what you started to evoke. The opening night, which I had the good fortune to attend, got a huge standing ovation. The audience loved it. Then the reviews started coming in. The first was the rave review I quoted from The Guardian, which says, "Opening night is captivating in its glittering strangeness." Time Out gave us, I said, 4 stars. They loved it. They say in the second half things get wilder. It's here that Wainwright's score really comes into its own as Myrtle becomes ever more detached from reality. And they call it a, quote, "a weird, wry, very human vehicle for a superb group of actors." Then some other reviews came in, using words such as misguided, self-important, misogyny, confusing, muddled, and I quote, "a strange adaptation of a strange film with a maddening lack of focus." In other words, there was a real split. There was no middle road in all this. There were 2 extremes. And I wanted to, which is probably normal for something the likes of which has never been seen on the West End, but I wanted to ask you 2 questions related to the reviews. The one, in fact, who comes under the most criticism from the anti-group is Ivo Van Hove.
Yeah.
And The Independent writes, "Rufus Wainwright's songs reach new emotional heights. Smith's performance is radiant, but Ivo Van Hove's stage adaptation is sometimes misjudged." And among the misjudgments that are cited by the anti-critics is his use of a giant screen. Now, Rufus, I've seen concert versions of your operas where you use a screen, but it never is a screen. In this musical, the screen is actually showing what the actors are doing on stage, and that is not that kind of screen that you've ever used, but this is one of Ivo Van Hove's favorite devices. So one reviewer said that the giant screen makes the video work completely pulls focus. The actors are robbed of agency in this space, since watching faces in tight, hard close-up is always going to be more attention-grabbing than watching them on the stage. How did you feel about the screen? Did you feel that it added or distracted from the actors, and what about from your music?
Well, I felt 2 things. One is that, on one hand, I loved them a lot because they were very effective in terms of getting, inside, the ensemble and focusing on certain, interactions. And then also there was something where because it was based on a movie, it kind of made, it brought that cinematographic, whatever word, into the mix, and so forth. The major problem that I had is that, and this is something that we ran into at some point, is how much time it took to figure out that, and how little time we had to actually create the show.
Let me just interject that the slide that you're seeing up there shows the screen and the actors. So from an audience point of view, you're seeing the actors on the stage, and then above them is there a huge screen where you're sort of almost like watching them in a movie.
No, but the thing is that, when you look at most Broadway shows, they usually take about 10 years. Mine took 5, and then when we got into rehearsals, we couldn't rehearse some of it because the screens weren't ready, and then there's a lot of time spent really trying to educate the camera people about, what angles to take. So I think if we had more, I think we needed more time. That was my only complaint. But in terms of the device, I loved it, and so forth. So, but it's complicated because it's very sophisticated what he and Jan do. So.
Yeah, also sometimes the screen showed action off of the stage. For example, there's one point when Myrtle is drunk and it's taken outside the theater and we showed the slide from that, and then you see on the screen and you realize this is the theater you walked into, and so you're actually seeing live action there. Now we get to the sad part, closing night. The show, as you said, closed early, which, is a devastating thing, seemingly having missed its audience, and although not the opening night audience, which, as I said, adored it, some reviewers asked why you chose to do this kind of show on the West End rather than in a more experimental space like the Almeida.
Yeah, well, I think that they have a point. I think we made a mistake in terms of going directly to the West End, because we were at the Gilded, which is one of the most beautiful theaters on the West End, and it was like Fawlty Towers, opening night, and Les Miserables. Those were the three. So I think it was probably a miscalculation. You should have gone to the smaller theater first, and then you could have had a few more iterations of it. I mean, I love the fact that we went down in a glittery, fiery mess theater with, the biggest budget and the biggest stars, so it was sort of, what can I say, it was, so it was kind of it was a great experience. But yeah. One of the producers or something? Complaining? Anyway. But yeah, we probably should have gone to down there.
Okay, well, as a conclusion, speaking about opening night, you gave an interview to The Guardian, which did not hold back. And
well,
can you tell?
I was very diplomatic. But what happened is that when we had this sort of, I don't think they have it in France originally. They don't have it in the United States like they do in England, where suddenly the tabloids and the papers start to have this kind of battle between each other, and it's like a real mud fight, really. And Sheridan Smith, who was the lead, she's very well known in the tabloids. She's a kind of a household name, and so there were certain people who were saying, like, what is our English Rose doing in this, horrible, catastrophe, and so that kind of went on for a while. And we were all told to not say anything and to sort of kind of ride it out, and so forth, which I do think was a mistake. But so we kind of let it go, let that happen for about a month. And then finally, The Guardian wanted to speak to me, and I did want to have some, say on my experience to the press. So I did this interview, and I was trying very hard to be, diplomatic and not throw anyone under the bus or anything. And but then at one point, and this really comes from somewhere true, in the sense that I went to all the previews, and I would go out and have a cigarette at the intermission, and I would see the people who would leave, who were not happy, and there was this kind of aggressive, very like pissed off, very how can I say it, like, yeah, whatever, aggressive and pissed off. Let's leave it at that. But narrow-minded view, and so I would see that every night, and it definitely had an impression on me. And then that being said as well, all the actors and all the artists up there in general are always like, things are bad in England right now, and so forth. Like, there's losing funding for the arts. It's hard to get a job. It's like, it's very rough. So then in the interview, I just mentioned, I said, well, I will say that after not having worked in England for a few years, especially since COVID, I did notice that since Brexit, there's been a certain narrowing in the audience, and that, it's, there's, and I said, and this was what I really wanted to say, is that I said, when I write something, I wanted to write it for people with an imagination. I require someone with an imagination. They don't, then they're not going to like what I do. Anyway, you read the article. It actually comes out quite well when you read the actual article. And during the whole thing, I'm very apologetic. I'm like, look, the piece deserved a lot of criticism. We didn't have enough time. It was just sort of like this little side thing. The headline of the article was Rufus blames flop on Brexit, and then suddenly there was this huge fight again between everyone, and I became this like lightning rod for Ramoners, they call them, and I think especially because I'm not English, they took great offense that I but then of course half the people would be like, you're kind of right, but you're not allowed to say that,
You did mention that you thought that post-Brexit it was perhaps too European of a
yes.
word.
If
that's part of your diplomacy.
Yes. I actually ended up apologizing, not publicly, but I did to the team because the producers who were up there, making that weird noise, they were very, they were not happy because it was just inflammatory, and I did apologize. I said, look, this was probably not the right forum to do it in, but that being said, I stand by what I say, and I tend to actually, and I'm happy, as I said, we went down in the glorious, flames, glitter, and all of that. So, but I had one last great story about the very end of the play, and is that on the last night, I invited Pete Townsend to come, from the Who, and he came, and I saw him. For the first act, I sat alone in this area where not a lot of people were, and I shed a few tears and had this sort of very morose moment, and even thought like, we should be taking a picture of me here alone. This would be a great opportunity. But I was just there, and then I met Pete Townsend at the interval, who was completely floored by the piece. He was like, this is one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. It's so interesting. Like he really loved it. And then I watched the second half with him because there was a seat next to him. And then at the end, he was like, this is a great masterpiece. He really loved it. And then as we were leaving the theater, he turned to the theater and he went, fuck the critics, fuck the critics. Screaming at everybody, and then we went backstage. And so it was. I felt vindicated by that.
I can see. Well, you should feel vindicated also, as I said, by the audience reaction on opening night, which was absolutely a standing ovation for what seemed like ever. Moving on to this week, your second big adventure of the year, we have Dream Requiem, which was commissioned by some 7 orchestras internationally, and the Royal Ballet in London is also going to turn it into a ballet. And it's based on text by Lord Byron and the Latin Requiem Mass. Its world premiere, as I said, will take place Friday, and it will be star-studded, featuring soprano Anna Prohaska, the Maîtrise de Radio France, the Chœur de Radio France, and the Orchestre Philharmonique de Radio France, conducted by Nico Frank, and actress Meryl Streep will perform as the narrator. You, of course, are the composer. Let me start by asking, can we have a black screen up there, please? Thank you. Let me start by asking a generic question before getting to the Requiem itself. A composer needs to know all the instruments. You play piano and guitar. And as far as I know, you do not have formal training in orchestral composition.
I went to McGill for a bit,
And for how long?
About a year and a half.
Okay, well, I'm just going to ask you, so how did you do that? How do you know to hear all the different instruments in your head?
Yeah, well, I this is my fourth large classical work, because there was the Sonnets as well that I orchestrated. And, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that I started going to the opera intensely when I was about 13, so I would go all the time. And I remember my mother gave me, $100. I went down to visit my dad at one point, and my mother gave me $100 for the weekend. And I spent $95 on an opera ticket. So I had no money, So I listened to that music, and someone told me something very important at one point. He said, a teacher of mine, who actually, I studied with him for quite a while. He had studied with Nadia Boulanger, so I was sort of in that sort of line. But he told me that it's very important to go and hear music, but really you should always really listen hard and try to and treat it as an exercise in your education. So I did that, and then when it came time to write my first opera, I chose something very, very approachable for me. Like, it was only 4 characters. It was a 2-act kind of parlor piece called Prima Donna, and I leaned heavily on like my romantic leanings, and then I learned a lot in that process, and as I went along I learned more. I will say that without the ability to listen to it, which we have now because of technology,
right,
to put it into a computer, to play the instruments on keyboard and hear the inner harmonies, because I do stuff by ear. I can't read music too, but I probably wouldn't have been able to do it right away if I didn't have that technology. So that's how it works. And then but then as you go on, you learn more and so forth.
Well, this is just a quick curiosity question. Are you aware of, do you know, a 1978 novel and a 2000 film called Requiem for a Dream?
Yes, I do, yes.
Is there any reference? It's a film that's about addiction.
Yeah.
And in some ways you could say Dream Requiem is about our addiction to destructive comfort.
Yeah. In terms of, it's interesting how this piece came about, because as most works, I think ballad works are, it's a group of people who help them, who birth them, and essentially, I had been asked by the Greek National Opera to do an opera about the Greek Revolution in about a year. They wanted me to do it, and I was like, I don't. It's really not up my alley. I like Greek food, but they were so sweet and so kind, as they always are, and so charming, the Greeks, that I said, okay, well, I'll do something for you. I'll do like a 20-minute something. And so then it was funny because I thought maybe I'll do something really cutting edge and modern and like obtuse and very avant-garde. And I even thought maybe of taking some text from Lesbos, from refugees from Syria, and like turning it into something very shocking and stuff. So I was sort of really more on that track. And then a friend of mine said, Rufus, the poet who is most associated with the Greek Revolution is Byron, Lord Byron, because he died there, and then he also funded part of it. So I was like, no, I'm done with the romantics. I'm going to move on to something contemporary. I'm for the now. I'm all about the now. But then one day I was on my phone. I just kind of said, well, maybe I'll Google Byron, Greek Revolution, just check. And the first thing that came up was darkness. Like I said, it was a message. It was darkness. And I just started reading the poem, and I was like, shit. Okay, here we go. We're back in the romantic. Like, I can't escape it. Like, as kind of modern as I want to be. So I just fell head over heels in love with the poem. And then COVID happened, and then someone at the Royal Ballet did Arthur Pita, who's going to be the choreographer for the Royal Ballet piece. He did something with my Agnus Dei, and then he said, you should do the whole Requiem. And I was like, that's a good idea. And COVID's happening, everybody's sick. And then my friend, and then the first line was a dream, and then my publisher said, oh, Dream Requiem. She came up with the title, and suddenly it was 7 cities wanted to do it, and I believe in that kind of spirit of that we're all just kind of vessels, for these works, and you have to be able to listen, and therefore produced.
Well, since obviously I have not seen the Requiem performed, we'll only do that on Friday. Some of my next questions are going to rely on what I called Dream Requiem according to Jorn Weisberg, who is Rufus's husband. He writes that your fascination with the Requiem form goes back to when you were a teenager and your mother played you a recording of Verdi's Requiem, and I remember you in the Verdi suite with Leontine Price and Jussi Björling. What about the Requiem form?
Yeah, I mean, well, that particular recording changed my life. I was 13, and my mom and my aunt Anna, they brought home this recording. I think it was the Vienna Philharmonic, I think. But anyways, the three of us sat down and listened to it from beginning to end. And by the end of that 2-hour, process, I was a different person. I became a total opera fanatic, and the next day, just started only listening to that type of music and spending $95 on opera tickets. And so it was like a real calling, and it was because of the Requiem. And then, interestingly enough, when you say McGill, I went to McGill for about 1.5 years in music. I did terrible. I wasn't a good student. And my mother actually said to me, because this is what Bob Dylan had done. She said, Rufus, it's important to go to music school, but it's more important to drop out. so that's what I did. To do what your mother tells you. But I did. But what was great is that while I was there, I was in the choir, and somehow that year they did Verdi's Requiem. So I got to actually be in the choir and perform it. So I took that as another sign. And I love the other one. I love Forey's Requiem, all of them. I love Berlioz.
What about Mozart?
Oh, he's okay. I love him. Of course.
To write a Requiem during COVID, it seems very appropriate.
Yeah.
Jorn, I'm going back to him now, writes, the Dream Requiem is the amalgamation of two musical and creative ideas that have been developing side by side in Rufus Wainwright's mind for a long time. They were brought together finally through the singularly dramatic experience of COVID-19, shutting down the world in 2020, and the California wildfires of the same year, the largest in recorded history. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think you have to also talk about the poem. Because,
we're going to.
Yeah, but the reason is because Darkness was written in 1816, which was the year of this amazing volcano.
It was 1815 was the big volcano thing, and a year later.
So a year later he wrote it, and so there was a year where there was only darkness. There was no summer or spring. It was winter for a year all over the world, and nobody knew what was happening. So he wrote. I think Frankenstein was written that year. So there was a lot of kind of Gothic work. So the poem is all about ecological destruction, and yes, living in California during that time, it was actually pretty crazy because we had, when COVID first began, everybody in LA especially we felt a little guilty, frankly, because it was beautiful weather, there was no cars on the highways, the smog lifted, you could see the view of the mountains, it was gorgeous actually for the most part, and there you could, you didn't have to, there was no restrictions because nobody really lives that close to each other, so we were kind of like, whatever, we weren't like that, but we felt a little guilty. But then a year later, these wildfires came, and it was just like, whatever, we had our comeuppance, shall we say, through the fires, so I was very affected by that.
Well, let's go to the music itself. We're going to start with an excerpt from the Offertorium, again, quoting Jorn, maybe the most contemplative, uplifting, and spiritual movement of Dream Requiem.
But we should just preface this. So, is this from the computer stuff?
Yeah.
Okay. No, but this is a computer. This is not like a real orchestra, and the voice is a computer voice. So it's not. This is like for This is
No,
never-
this is the viola solo.
Oh, the viola solo. Well, yeah, I guess so. Okay, the repertoire. Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
Can we have that slide 16, please? You grew up in a Catholic household at a time when Montreal was very Catholic still.
Well, it was, we weren't Catholic per se, but my mother had been brought up Catholic. The 70s in Montreal, actually, it was called the Silent Revolution. And so they'd actually really fought against the church in the 70s, but the previous, the 60s and the 50s were incredibly Catholic. And Quebec was far more Catholic than France. You could only read stuff, that the Pope allowed. And so I think there was a lot of Catholicism around, and it was very embedded in the culture, but there had been a real battle,
But if my information is correct, you were never confirmed or took communion. And my question is, does that in any way relate to what we've just heard that has no human voices in it, that has...
Oh, totally, yeah. No, I did actually, because the offertorium is when you take, the host, when you take communion, and I did have a sort of bizarre situation where my mother decided to not baptize me or my sister, but she also wanted to send us to Catholic school, and we took catechese and everything. We would go to church, and we could never do anything. Like, we couldn't take the communion. We couldn't do confession or anything. And it was this strange kind of thing where I think she wanted us to feel a little bit like outsiders. And kind of to struggle a bit. It was whatever, she was like that. But the biggest problem, the thing that scarred me the most, is that when I was in grade 1, all the other kids were having their first communion, and they all got these glow-in-the-dark rosaries. They were glow-in-the-dark. and they wouldn't give me one.
Oh.
And it was like $1, and they wouldn't just give me one. They was like, "Yeah, you can't have one." So I think that did affect me a lot, actually, not having been baptized. And I have wondered about actually getting baptized just to get it over with.
So this is why you love human voices.
Yeah, so I left human voices out of the offertorium because it's
Well, next we have a short video taken by an iPhone, so this is not exactly your high quality, of a rehearsal of the Los Angeles Master Chorale of all the choral parts with the pianist. It was done just a couple of weeks ago. And less than half of the choir members who will perform in the concert on Friday are present, so you have to imagine double the voices and double the volume. Remember, this is the same man you heard singing just a little while ago. The range is truly amazing. We're going to, Rufus mentioned Byron's poem, Darkness. What caused it was the eruption of Mount Tambora in Indonesia, and as he said, it darkened the skies for weeks. And to this day, it's the most violent eruption of a volcano in recorded history. It is incorporated into the Requiem, as is the Latin Requiem Mass. Let's hear now, or before we actually hear it, Darkness 4, which is the last excerpt from the poem, and it's the 16th of the Requiem, 17 movements. Here it's read by Saffron Burrows, and this is what Meryl Streep will be reading. Do you want to situate it for us, because it comes right after a very specific part in Byron's book.
Dog.
It's the dog.
Are we doing the dog section now, or we did the, yeah, are we doing the dog?
We're going to do something that will really make you unhappy, and I'm really sorry about this, because what we've had to do, just for time reasons, is we've had to merge two excerpts. So we do the first, we're going to show the first 3 minutes of the movement, and then we jump to the last minute at the end. But you can talk about the dog.
Oh yeah, no, well, Byron was a big fan of dogs, and in the poem, there's a dog that perishes, that dies, and which is it, and that also kind of ties into our life, because we had a dog that we got during COVID. His name was Puccini, and he was very cute. He was a little Australian, miniature Australian Shepherd, but sadly was killed by another dog. We went to visit some people in Northern California, and they had this big boxer and whatever, they got into a fight over food, and so be careful with food and dogs. And anyways, and that was really traumatizing. It was really our first ever dog. We have a new dog now called Siegfried, who's very well taken care of. But
I'll say so.
Yes. So whatever. It really the death of the dog really affected us. And it's just weird that in this poem there is this dog that dies. You know, it's a strange parallel. And yeah. And also the Requiem is dedicated to Giuseppe Verdi and Puccini. The other Puccini. Yeah, the little Puccini.
That's really funny. Yeah, the dog has been licking his dead master's hand.
Yes, yes.
And finally, after a while, when he gets no response and no caress, the dog, sort of the symbol of unconditional and innocent love, dies. And it's at this part of the poem, and I'm just down here, just to give you an idea of the poem. It's the death of everything, sort of one by one. But when the dog actually dies, is a really very strong moment. And this section, I think, is extraordinary in the Requiem. Can we have it just?
I had a dream, which was not at all a dream. The bright sun was extinguished, and the stars did wander darkling in the eternal space, rayless and pathless. And the icy earth swung blind and blackening in the moonless air. Morn came and went and came, and brought no day. And men forgot their passions in the dread of this, their desolation. And all hearts were chilled into a selfish prayer for light. And they did live by watchfires, and the thrones, the palaces of crowned kings, the huts, the habitations of all things which dwell, were burnt for beacons. Cities were consumed, and men were gathered round their blazing homes, to look once more into each other's face. Happy were those who dwelt within the eye of the volcanoes and their mountain torch. A fearful hope was all the world contained. Forests were set on fire, but hour by hour they fell and faded, and the crackling trunks extinguished with a crash, and all was black. The brows of men, by the despairing light, wore an unearthly aspect, as by fit the flashes fell upon them. Some lay down and hid their eyes and wept, and some did rest their chins upon their clenched hands, and smiled. Others hurried to and fro and fed their funeral piles with lost world. And then again with curses cast them down upon the dust, and gnashed their teeth and howled. The wild birds shrieked, and terrified, did flutter on the ground, and flap their useless wings. The wildest brooks came tame and tremulous. The vipers called and twined themselves in their multitude, hissing and stingless. They were seen for food, and roared, but for a moment was one that gained himself again. A meal was brought with blood, and each sate sullenly apart, gorging himself in gloom. No love was left, all earth was but one thought, and that was death, immediate and glorious. And the pang of famine fell upon
Again, with my apologies to Rufus for having merged the beginning and the end of what is a 15-minute movement. It's just really gorgeous. And I mean, I really like cigarettes and chocolate milk a lot. But wow, to think that the same person who wrote and sang that composed this, and really, bravo. I began with Jorn, and I will conclude with him. Towards the end of the Requiem in Byron's poem, the narrator proclaims that the world disappeared in darkness and that she was the universe. That's Byron. Your Requiem ends with the traditional in paradiso. May the angels lead you into paradise. It would seem from Byron's The Universe, she was the universe, that this is a requiem for the universe. But Jorn, on the contrary, writes that you intend, quote, to overcome in your music the desolation and tragedy of death and give rise to hope and beauty through the music. And he titles his commentary, The Soothing Universe.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, the way that I clarify it is that the last line of the poem, she is the universe, and before that, Byron basically states that none of this matters because the universe is so vast, and we're just sort of a speck in it, and at the end it's almost like nothing happened, because we're just really insignificant, which is very true when you compare us to the universe. But then with Paradisum, which comes after what she says, there's the children's choir, and it's more, for me, it's more of a question mark, in the sense of, where is heaven, or what is heaven? I mean, is it in the imagination, or does it exist, or is it on another planet, or is it, with us here today? Like it's such an enigma, obviously, and the children are kind of going there, and they could either be going to heaven, or it could be like the Pied Piper, who's stealing all the children away into darkness. So I don't know. It's quite an eerie. There was actually, the end of it is actually there was someone I played it for recently, a French person from Quebec, and I don't know if this is an expression they have in France, but I guess they have it in Quebec where it's what is it? It's the end of it is it's like a poisson, the end of a fish. There's a queue de poisson. I don't know if it's queue de poisson, but there's something that's about like the end of the piece is like the end of the fish, which is very mysterious. I don't know. I didn't say the expression right, but if anybody could tell me afterwards. So it's for me, it's more of a question mark.
I have a lot more questions, but I'm sure that there are people who would like to ask questions from the audience. We'll take a couple before we have a group to champagne. No?
Hi. I remember 20 years ago at the Battle Farm, before playing Little Sister on the piano, you said that the ghost of Mozart came to kick your ass while writing the song.
Yes.
Did something similar happen while writing your Requiem?
Well, I actually do believe that Mozart did kick my ass that night, because there's a song, Little Sister, that I wrote in a kind of Mozartian style, and see, there he is, he agrees, and essentially I think I was just very drunk, and I played it terribly, and I think it was one of these things where if you're going to go up there and pretend to be Mozart, you better like be somewhat as good, in your abilities. So I do believe that. But I do believe actually with this piece, and why I dedicated it to Verdi and so forth, is that I was very much, communing with past composers, and you do hear a lot of different requiems in my requiem. There's a bit of Mozart's requiem, like that Rex Tremende sounds actually a bit Mozartian, and then there's a lot of there's some forays and some different ones. So it's I was speaking to those people. I was paying my respects for sure.
We have another question?
I wanted to be prepared. I read the poem, Arent's poem. I was amazed by its darkness. The world ends. Nothing is alive.
Yeah.
And I guess she is the darkness.
Yeah.
It's the end of the world. I don't know your music. Is that what you feel?
Do I feel like it's the end of the world? Well, there's an argument for that, for sure. But of another world. So it's. I think it's very much. But I do think we're at the cusp, no matter what. We're at a certain crossroad or some kind of important moment. So I think it's good to contemplate. Could this be the end, or could this be the beginning? And it's really our choice. Sort of. Maybe. It's maybe our choice. Or maybe not.
Is there another question? Okay, well then, Rufus, I would like to thank you, as I said, for being, for so many years, a loyal friend to the arts arena. Rufus, I'm very happy and proud to say, is on our Arts Advisory Council. And when he's come through Paris and had a very busy week like he has this week, he's always made time for us, and we're very grateful for that. And I'd also like to thank Sherry Peacock, who did just a superb job of organization. And again, thank you, Rufus, for taking the moto taxi to get here. And our thanks to the U.S. Embassy for letting us in this beautiful and historic room. And also thank you, Federico Papi, who helped me where to cut on some of the musical excerpts. And now we will all toast in advance Rufus's beginning of 2024 with the upcoming Requiem in an adjoining room for a coupe de champagne. Thank you for being with us.